And hello, everyone, and welcome to One Take because life has no rehearsal. Today, I am thrilled to welcome Jenica Oliver. She is the owner and CMO of Blueprint Marketing Group, but never mind that part. Jenica's specialty is fast moving consumer goods. Most fractional CMOs, they love startups, B2B, it's more relaxed, everything. Fast moving consumer goods, oh my God, that's like herding cats. You need to know about distribution, about packaging, pricing elasticity. You need to know about segmentation. You need to evaluate, I don't know how many segments of people to see if they're valuable or not. And then on top of that, you need to create a media strategy that reaches all of them and surgically separates them and then deliver all of the creative. So, Jenica specializes in herding cats. And boy, that is a difficult environment. So, Jenica, very welcome to One Take. I am really thrilled to welcome you here.
Thank you very much, Marcelo. I'm happy to be here.
It's great. And then, well, as we were talking before, by the time we get to be where we are, we've gone through like a zillion decisive moments. Some of them are small. Do I get up in the morning? Is it worth it? And some of them really define us. So tell us about one special moment that defined the real Jenica moving forward.
It was one of my first opportunities to work in consumer products. When I majored in marketing, which is a pretty broad field. I didn't realize how broad it was back then, but it's a pretty broad field. And depending on the discipline or the industry that you work in, marketing takes many different forms.
Yep.
But I had an opportunity to work very early in my career as an analyst at then Dr. Pepper 7 Up.
Oh,
And I joined a team, very junior role, doing a lot of analytics and campaign analysis and brand analysis, all that great stuff. But I really thought, this is what I enjoy doing. I understand the category, I understand the marketing, like all of the things that I had learned about academically really started to come, started to make sense for me. And it was during a time of transition where Dr. Pepper 7 Up was being purchased or bought out by Cadbury Schweppes. And the incoming chief marketing officer, a lady by the name of Kim File, she was pivotal in my career. She actually fired me. She informed me that under her leadership, all of the marketers on all of the broad brand teams needed to have an MBA. And at that point in time, I didn't have one. I felt
oh,
like I finally found my place and I didn't have my MBA yet. So it wasn't my last day immediately, but I knew that my days were numbered. And having just recently finished undergrad, I didn't think. And back then, having an MBA wasn't necessarily a requirement. Like what they would tell you in school was, if a company wants you to have your MBA, they'll pay for it. Like, don't worry about it. You're good. And I wasn't good. And so I went to work, in another industry and realized like it was like watching paint dry, where I really felt like I thrived in the chaos of marketing was in FMCG. So I later went back. I did actually take her advice. She and I kept in contact over the years. We laugh about it now. When I told her, I was like, "You fired me." That's kind of what got me going because I knew then that if that was the requirement for me to do what it was I felt that I really wanted to do, that I needed to get the credentials to be able to do it. So I credit her for kind of, putting me on that path. I'm not sure how far I would have gotten had I not, gotten my MBA. But I originally never intended to do marketing. I was planning to go to law school.
oh
So
wow.
that position and her terminating me didn't set me on the path to law school. I was actually studying for the LSAT at the time. It motivated me even more to, go back and get my MBA. And I hadn't looked back since then.
Wow. Oh, that's great. That's absolutely great. Actually, the opposite of another friend of mine who started in business and then decided she wanted to be a lawyer, and she's a very well known, very hardworking immigration lawyer in New York. So she began the opposite. But it's interesting how careers, kind of change. So being, the consummate, FMCG people here, I love retail. I gotta say, I love soap. I love detergent. I love toothpaste. I've worked all of my life doing that kind of thing, right? Raid and cookies and crackers, stuff like that. I love it. But if there's an industry that has changed substantially and people never realize it, it is the retail industry. When I was young, you would go to the supermarket and then you buy cookies or toilet paper or whatever. And then it changed and we could buy it online if we wanted to. So for example, you don't want to buy 50-pound bags of dog food, because then you have to carry it home. So you order it from Amazon or Chewy or something. So that changed. And e-commerce, did change our industry a lot. Moreover, then at some point, some of us, I guess, became, I guess, rich and lazy. There's no other way to say it. And then we have people who work on the gig economy who go to the supermarket for us. So I think we lose two things: the randomness of finding new stuff in the supermarket. So now, by the way, I go back to the supermarket like once or twice a week. I make it my life purpose. I really want to go there, expose myself to random brands and new brands and all of that. But it changed that, and it changed the relationship with the brands. You no longer choose Palmolive. You basically choose it in a menu, and the guy just buys it. But there's no. So I'm sure you've gone through even more changes. What change? What change happened that, in looking back, you would have said, "Man, I didn't see that coming at all."
Well, the pandemic, for one, it forced a lot of companies to be digital first, um, putting together omni-channel marketing plans almost overnight. Not only did the retailers require it, but that was really the only way that you would be able to get in front of your consumers. Whereas before, digital was part of the mix, or in some cases, there were some companies that were all digital. They had not branched out into brick and mortar retail locations. Some of the brick and mortar retail locations infrastructure wasn't set up to be able to pivot during a time when stores weren't open and being able to go into the stores. And so, and even for those brands that did have a digital presence, consumers' shopping journey, as you mentioned, has changed a lot. The discovery on the digital shelf is very different than discovery in stores. Whereas before, we used to talk about that 3-second rule. You have about 3 seconds to capture your target's attention as they're breezing down the grocery store aisle. Well, on the digital shelf, not only are they presented with far more options, but many of them are much less random. My shopping journey, my family hates going to the grocery store with me because I can't pull myself away from categories I used to work in. I still go back and check on my babies. I go and look in the dairy case to see what the new innovations are. And I purchase a lot of those innovations because I'm intrigued, by new things and how things have evolved. And so it's a very different experience. I shop with a list, but I often come home with a lot of things that aren't on the list. But I also realized that that's the way I grew up. My mother was very motivated by coupons and special deals and new items. And so we would always try new items. And I think it's that discovery that really helps me as a marketer think of alternate ways of getting in front of your ideal customer or your target consumer. But then on the flip side of that, it also impacts the way that I shop and the way that I think about, shelf back. What does it look like on the shelf, whether it's the physical shelf or the digital shelf? Everything from packaging, standing out in terms of pricing.
Right.
Now there's those little widgets across different platforms that will tell you that there's a lower price someplace else.
Yeah.
So, for those shoppers that are price conscious, you have to really do a good job of getting them to understand the unique value proposition. What makes this item special? What are you delivering as part of the user experience that's going to keep them on your platform as opposed to migrating to another platform for the same item? So it's those are the types of things. That's the chaos that I mentioned that I tend to thrive in a little bit. As a marketer, I've always felt like more of a general manager as opposed to a specialist. Having an opportunity to work with different cross-functional teams, it's different every day, but still rooted in very familiar marketing principles.
How about people? One of the things that drove my wife crazy. Actually, she stopped going to the supermarket with me. She said it was highly embarrassing. I launched a bunch of products in Mexico when I lived in Mexico. But I launched L'Oreal. I launched Plenitude, and then Lancome, and then this, and then that. So I would stop in supermarkets and see people who bought, let's say, oil of Olay when we had Plenitude or something, and I would ask him flat out, like, how come you're buying this? Plenitude is cheaper. So that was one. People, like, I don't have to justify myself to you. But in some other cases, it was really funny because, for example, for Colgate, we had one of the Mexican brands is Fuerza Viva, Life Force. So Fuerza Viva, we had everything. We had the super big, basic packets of detergent that were you know, like monophosphorus kind of thing, like awful skin irritants. So we have Fuerza Viva. Then we had, better Fuerza Vivas that were a bit more expensive, had, like double phosphorus or something, and, they were less irritating. But then we even had Fuerza Viva Ultra Concentrate, which was really expensive, but you needed, just a tiny little bit. And I would see people, oh yeah, and we had a soap bar that was also like a detergent bar, which was the cheapest of the cheap. And I would see, women buying, like the bar and then the super concentrate, which is you're buying something that costs essentially 12 cents, and then you're buying something that costs $6. Like, why? And I would stop and ask him. So I made it a habit of, asking consumers. Actually, Colgate, I don't know if you've been through this. Colgate, when I moved to the Dominican Republic, the head of marketing of Colgate said, you guys live in ivory towers, you make too much money, and nothing to do with the rest of the population. So they force us to do home surveys. We have to go home. Have you had experiences like that? Tell me more about it.
Absolutely. Actually, those are some of the more interesting ones. What I love about marketing, or part of my role as a marketer, has always been consumer insights. Because although consumers can't necessarily tell you what they need, they can clearly articulate what their challenges are,
Yeah.
and what's not working for them. And so we have to be astute enough and creative enough to kind of read between the lines, ask the right questions, steer clear of imparting our biases and leading them, because if they knew what they needed, they would either create it or they would just tell us. And generally, that's not it. They're reacting to what's available, or they're reacting to the problems that they've not yet found a solution for. And so when we talk to consumers, we find that a lot of the things that we believe are very different than what they perceive. For
Yes.
example, in my past, I've worked at very large organizations, consumer products organizations, as well as food service, quick serve restaurants. And when I worked at Pizza Hut, as an example, I worked in product marketing, and we would go to different markets. Now, I live in the Dallas Metroplex, Dallas, Texas. Here, where Pizza Hut was located, headquartered, and we had Pizza Huts all over the place, but like in metropolitan cities. In rural areas, in smaller towns, they still had dine-in Pizza Hut locations with buffets. The experience was very different. So when we would talk to them about their point of reference for Italian food, many consumers would say, many of the focus group respondents would say Pizza Hut was their idea of Italian, because that was their frame of reference. So here we were trying to reinvent the wheel, bring all of these different types of, when really what they wanted was the, authentic experience. And for them, Pizza Hut delivered that. So really, if we could just put more cheese on it and, like do more of the same, they would be good. Similarly, when I worked for Mission, I was a brand director. When I worked for Mission Foods, when I first joined the organization, they were really pushing the boundaries in terms of authentic Mexican. And Mission at that time, and I probably believe still is, was more of a general market brand. We had the Guerrero brand, which was more
Yeah.
traditional Hispanic. But for the Mission portfolio, it was really targeted toward the general market consumer. So we had recipes where they were making mole, they were making really traditional Mexican dishes. And what we found was all they really wanted to know was, if I buy a pack of 10 flour tortillas, what do I do with the ones that are left after we have Taco Tuesday? And so, we started doing breakfast tacos and cheese roll ups, and, they would call it like grilled cheese, which was really a quesadilla. But, when we started really meeting our consumers where they were, as opposed to trying to change their behavior and just lean into the behaviors that they were already doing, we actually saw significant sales increases. We would give them recipes to make their salsa from scratch with a recipe, a list of ingredients as long as my arm. When we actually sold a a bottled salsa.
Yeah.
So instead of having them make salsa from scratch, just insert bottled salsa here. And so we made it much more approachable. They actually then started to think about tortillas differently. When we talked to, traditional Hispanic consumers, like they didn't feel like tortillas were Mexican. Now, similarly to my Pizza Hut experience, we'd go to some areas and Mexican for them was Taco Bell. So what they wanted was the Mexican pizza. They wanted recipes for how can I recreate this experience at home. And so, but had we not talked to those consumers, while we're trying to figure out how to put flaxseed here and do this here, all they wanted was whole grain options or low carb options at the time. We were explaining to them that corn tortillas were gluten free. We didn't change them at all. They're naturally, gluten free. And so we really had to come down out of that ivory tower, that corporate environment that you talked about, and really learn what are the challenges that our consumers are facing, which ultimately is how do I get dinner on the table quickly, something that my kids are going to like, my whole family's going to like, without wasting money. And by simplifying that formula based off of their feedback, a lot of the things that we were doing, we had to, evolve. We had to kind of reinvent the mission, portfolio for the general market consumer. And it didn't necessarily mean changing the products themselves. It was changing the positioning of the products and the way it was being presented to them, right down to the packaging. They wanted to see themselves and their family in those moments in the
Yeah.
creative.
So I'm a fan of mission, by the way, and I buy it. I have a different perspective. What I do is I just take cold cuts. I just put them in the tortilla, put some sauce, and then roll them, and that's my snack. I absolutely love mission tortillas. And after living in Mexico for 6 years, I don't take anything from anybody in terms of, oh yeah, the authentic ones are the corn tortillas. I like flour tortillas, period. And I lived in Mexico and I've been to the best Mexican restaurants I still love. So, one last one. Um, this is about resilience. This is about what a friend of mine calls POA, people of age, which somebody says, oh my God, that's so cultural, appropriation, but we're POAs and we're not DOAs, by the way. So let's say you were advising a CMO, CEO. They're interviewing candidates for like marketing or any of these creative positions. Some of the candidates are younger, some of the candidates are older. What do you say to that CEO about hiring an older candidate?
I think diversity is good. Diversity of age, diversity of ethnicity, diversity of background, diversity of experience. Because what tends to happen is we look for what we already have. We look for more of what we already have. And, as people of, my generation continue in the workforce or attempt to make moves in the workforce, I know a lot of people that face ageism. They're looking for social media managers or they're looking for, people who are social media experts, many of whom aren't always classically trained, in marketing. Maybe they have a bunch of followers themselves. They manage their own social media pages, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they understand the why behind the behaviors that ultimately result in that, growth in followers. And so, when you're looking at hires, look at what are the organization's true needs and who could best help to fulfill those needs and close those gaps. I'm actually a fan of interviewing without identifying information. What you often find is our own unconscious biases come into those interviews with
Yes.
us. Although the CEOs may be POAs, they always seem to think, or not always, but many of them think that we have to bring in younger people. They're going to stay longer. They're going to do, but those generations of younger talent also have a different experience. They have different makeup. They have different ideas around workplace and culture and longevity and loyalty. And so, finding someone who actually has the expertise and the experience to bring to the job, I think is, paramount and probably more important than the actual demographics, of the person. I was talking with someone not well, probably around the time of the pandemic, and many workplaces were challenged with the Gen Zs and the millennials. But my generation, like, we were built for this work from home thing. We were used to lack of supervision. We were used to coming into the office. Like, if we said we were working, we were working. Like, we knew what it took to get things done. And so, teams that had folks of more experience, tended to struggle a bit less with that change in environment. Those are things that we've been doing, accountability, all those things. But you also find people who can mentor, relate, coach, guide younger team members, and foster a more inclusive working environment. The first couple times I worked with some millennials and Gen Zers, I really had to change my approach. I had to not only learn about what motivates them as individuals, but also as generationally, but then also meet them where they were. A lot of things I thought I knew about them weren't necessarily accurate, or at least not about how they perform and behave at work. Many of them are really smart, but a lot of it has less to do with age and demographics and more about exposure and experience and desire. And so if you don't hire the right candidate, or if you're looking for a specific profile of candidate, I think organizations should be open to bringing in the people who are best suited for the job today. And I think a lot of those are going to be people with experience.
I agree. I totally agree. And not only experience. I've always, when I hired people, the experience part. I wanted the expertise associated with the experience, and by that I mean something happens to you. That's experience. But you actually think about it and you learn from it. That's expertise. That's completely different.
Yes. Yep.
So that's I guess my closing argument, Your Honor, in terms of why they should hire us. I think expertise is a great thing. So Janica, thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure. I look forward to connecting with you again on the fractional group and in real life, IRL, as they say, and keeping in touch because it's not a lot of us who do fast moving consumer goods. So it's always great to be like in touch with people who suffer it.
I
So
totally
thank you
agree.
very much, and I will see you then. Take care.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Bye.